The bear is consistently the most true-to-life representation of the service industry on TV. They nailed just the fast-paced, frenetic nature of working in a kitchen and working in a restaurant. It's clear to me that the team behind the show knew exactly what they were doing. To support this, not only is the food on screen really amazing looking, also, it's really well thought out, and the people on screen doing the cooking seem to know what they're doing, which I think is like insane for TV like this. How does it taste though? This video exists to answer the questions that we're dying to know from the bear. How do I make that, and how does it taste? I'm gonna start with season 1 and make every dish from the show. There are 11 dishes in total, so let's get started. It would feel weird to start this marathon with anything but the beef itself. The namesake of the restaurant is the classic Italian beef sandwich made of tender roast beef, homemade giardiniera, and tons of jus. If you're gonna home make this, you've gotta start with the giardiniera, as that takes the longest. I feel like half of the cooking in the first season is pretty much prepping giardiniera, which I love. It's a pickled chopped veggie that does a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to this sandwich. I'm using Brian Lagerstrom's recipe for giardiniera here, so check out his video for the full explainer. I'm gonna link to that down below in the description. Gonna chop a bunch of veg, things like cauliflower, bell pepper, serranos, jalapeno, and red onion, and then place it into a pot of hot pickling liquid. I added some sugar to mine as well. I'm not sure if that's traditional, but I also have more peppers, so it's a little bit of the sweet heat thing going on. Really like that. Let this cool and place it in the fridge with the brine for 2 days. Once those 2 days are up, remove the veggies from the brine and cover them in oil. This is just half olive oil and half light olive oil. I just kept pouring until all the veggies were covered. This will keep in the fridge for months. I know it's a common sandwich topping, but Megan Kay and I have been putting this on rice bowls, and it really slaps. Okay, now onto the beef itself. A couple of interesting things are shown about the beef Carmy serves on the show. First is related to the delivery. They're short on the usual beef, so he has to get a second shipment from a different hookup. This one is bone-in and requires a longer cook time. Traditional beef seems to be wet roasted for like 20 to 40 minutes, basically until the meat is medium rare so it can be thinly sliced and then dunked in the jus later. The bone-in meat doesn't allow for that, so he's got to pivot. For me, I couldn't find a top round, and the largest cut I could get was a chuck, so that's no biggie. The second issue I ran into was that I don't own a meat slicer, and I'm not about to buy one for this. So I opted to fully braise this until I could pull it apart, a decision I think is totally worth it. The flavors are all there, the texture is just a little different. Still delicious though. I'm gonna braise the meat with a mirepoix, another classic technique. One thing I noticed in the show that I thought was odd, Carmy used canned tomato in his beef braise. Someone from Chicago, please tell me if that's weird. I thought it was a little odd for beef like this, but who knows. The main seasoning I used for the braise was ground fennel, which to me tastes very Italian. Think Italian sausage and whatnot. That licoricey flavor is really delicious, but all the classic braise seasonings went in. Salt, pepper, onion, garlic, paprika, chili flake, all those are in there. This is gonna ride in a 350 Fahrenheit degree oven for like 2 hours. But my chuck is boneless and pretty small, so for you, just cook it until it's tender. That could be anywhere from 2 to 4 hours depending on the size. All you gotta do is check for doneness by pulling off little pieces with tongs or just poking it with a fork. And once it's there, you can remove the meat so it can cool. I'm gonna strain the braising liquid and taste it for seasoning, as this is gonna be the jus that we dunk our sandwich in, so make sure this tastes amazing. Mine needed some salt and a little more water just so I had enough to dunk and pour it over the sandwich. Shred your beef and pour in some of that jus so it's nice and moist before it goes onto the bread. You don't want dry pieces of meat going in before you have to dunk it or like pour on the jus. For the bread, a nice tasting white loaf with a thin crisp crust is good. This is probably the wrong bread, someone's gonna tell me in the comments, but I live in Seattle, so that's what I can find. To build it, place your meat on the roll and then top it with some jus, or dip the whole thing in for the full wet sandwich, and then top it with the giardiniera. I don't know why I had like low expectations for this sandwich. Something about just like it's braised beef and pickled veggies seemed kind of bland to me, but this thing is absolutely delicious. It's juicy, it's rich, it's fatty, it's really salty, and like I mentioned, the giardiniera does a lot of lifting for the sandwich itself. It needs those like sweet, spicy pickles to really be something more than just a slop of meat. This is absolutely one of the best sandwiches I've ever made. I'm really glad that I made this one. In the first episode, we're introduced to one of the best characters in the show, Sydney. Sid's staging, which basically is a service industry intern. It's often unpaid, depending on the kitchen and their qualifications. They may be peeling onions the whole time, or they may be doing a whole lot more like we see Sid doing. Often, but honestly not all the time, the staff make a family meal. This helps with the whole team morale, and everyone's gotta eat, so why not? So we see her prepping a fennel salad, some plantains, rice from a rice cooker, and some sort of really delicious looking beef stew. When challenged by Sweeps if she's gonna make something delicious or impressive, she hits him with the cold line of delicious delicious is impressive. I pieced together a vibe with the plantains in the stew that this could be some sort of Caribbean style stew. We see them eating beef here, so that's what I went for. The base of the stew is going to be this beautiful mix of diced bell pepper, diced yellow hot pepper, which is a little sweet and a little spicy. Unfortunately, I still can't find scotch bonnets anywhere, so I just used habanero. I know it's not the same, but it's better than nothing. Poke it with your knife a few times so it releases all the spice as it cooks. That way you don't have to dice it. No one's biting into a habanero, but you still get all of that good heat. Roughly chop and peel carrot for richness and body, and half a yellow onion roughly diced is gonna help with that as well. Most of these are gonna cook down completely into the braise. Seasoning / marinating the beef and veggies before cooking is a common practice in dishes like braised oxtail, so I'm gonna do that here. A pound of stew meat is going in. I'm just assuming she used some leftover trimmings from prepping beef sandwiches. Grate in a couple cloves of garlic and a knob of ginger. Season this is gonna come in the form of fresh thyme, salt, pepper, nutmeg, and an all-purpose seasoning blend. Now, a key ingredient is browning, which is a dark caramel colored liquid that adds a ton of color and a little deep flavor. Add enough for the whole bowl to turn darker. This should coat the meat and all the veggies. This can sit while we bring a Dutch oven up to temp. Once hot, add in a squeeze of oil and then pour the whole thing in. Let this achieve some color, but the nice thing is the browning pretty much gives us free richness in the end. Pour enough beef stock to almost completely cover the ingredients. Season this with ketchup, bay leaf, and soy sauce. Bring this to a simmer and cover for about 2 hours, then let this ride on low so the meat can become super tender. We see Sid preparing a fennel salad as well, so I started by thinly slicing the bulb of fennel and pulling off the fronds to serve on top. Tina makes fun of the leaves on top of the plantains, and I think these fronds were those leaves, so I'm just gonna use them. I'm gonna let the fennel hang out undressed so it doesn't wilt. At this point, I wanted to get my rice going because the beef is getting there. The rice itself is super easy. You could probably just make white rice and be happy with it, but I thought coconut rice made more sense. I just measured and washed 300 grams of rice and added it to my rice cooker with the majority of a can of coconut milk. I say the majority because I left a little in the can so it wouldn't have too much liquid. This is gonna depend on the size of your rice cooker though. Season this with salt and bay, cover it, and let it cook until it's done. That's the nice thing about a rice cooker is you literally just press a button and you're good to go. The sweet fragrance of this rice goes crazy well with the spice in the stew. Okay, right now it's been about 2 hours, so I'll pull a piece of meat and test it for tenderness. It needed a little bit more time, which is okay because I wanted to reduce the sauce a little more. Leave the lid off here and let this simmer for around 30 minutes. The rice is cooking, the stew is finishing, the salad is waiting, so let's fry up some plantains. Peel a few ripe plantains and slice them into coins on the bias. I know we see Sid using pretty unripe green plantains, but this is what I had. Ripe ones work really well too. Heat a layer of oil in a skillet until you can see bubbles form on a wooden spoon, and then gently slide in your plantains. These need about 2 to 3 minutes aside, but they can be pretty sticky, so be sure to move the pan around to keep them from sticking to the plantain next to it. Flip them once brown so they can get nice and caramelized on the second side. Remove these from the pan and then hit them with salt. These can cool on the paper towel or a wire rack to wick off any oil. One last chance to check on the stew, and this is the texture that I want. It's more saucy than stew, honestly, and I kind of like that here. I added a little bit more salt, and this is perfect. To dress the salad, I'll supreme this orange, something that a CIA graduate would probably do to add citrus to a salad. Supreme is the way that you get those like cute little pieces of orange without the white pith. You basically cut into it into a V for the first slice, and then after that first slice, you just rotate the orange and go along each line of pith, rotating out from the center of the orange. So an orange has like a bunch of different lines sticking out, like kind of like this. And then you just cut in between each one and then use your knife to sort of peel. I don't know if that makes sense. The hands probably didn't help. Season this with the juice from the orange. You can just kind of squeeze everything that's left on the base. Salt, pepper, some fennel fronds, and a larger bowl. My bowl was way too small here. This needs some good olive oil to create a dressing, and there you have it. Each component ready for plating. Sid served these in my absolute favorite plating of the whole show, in deli pints. It's amazing, it's spot on, and it works really well for the purpose of a scrappy family meal. I hate to spoil this so early, but this is my absolute favorite meal from the entire cooking process of all of these 11 dishes. It is sweet, it is spicy, it is fragrant, the plantains are delicious, the fennel salad with the citrus really helps balance everything. It is absolute perfection, and if you're gonna make anything from this video, this should absolutely be high on your list. She wasn't joking when she said delicious is impressive. Quick story, Matty Matheson produces the show and also stars in it as one of the characters, and that is an absolute win in my book. I got his cookbook back in like 2018. He was coming to a local bookstore in Deep Ellum in Dallas for a signing, just like a pretty small signing. I think him and the owner were friends. Megan Kay and I went to get it signed, and I was so nervous that she did most of the talking. So when he went to actually sign it, he pretty much signed it to her. She had to say like, hey, he's actually the one that does all the cooking. And so Matty asked me, hey, okay, what have you made from the book so far? And I had the gall to tell him I haven't made anything from the book so far. Literally nothing. I had opened it and marked it and hadn't made a single thing. Feels like one of those moments where I should have said way more, but I was like 24 and kind of embarrassed and kind of nervous. So things you just kind of learn as you go. Boom, right there. Shout out Matty, shout out world peace. Thanks for this, bud. Now, throughout the first season, we hear a lot about two main items on the menu at the beef: the sausage and peppers and the chicken and peppers. Sausage and peppers is about as classic of an Italian-American meal as you can get. The peppers are gonna be sauteed with some sliced onion for a bit of sweetness. Yellow onion is really good for this. One thing I think the show gets incredibly correct is just the amount of prep and portioning that's happening behind the scenes in a restaurant. A ton of work happens before service, before guests even arrive at the restaurant. Most dishes aren't made start to finish when the order comes in. They're put together using different levels of prepped components. Maybe this is just justifying it, but I'm gonna use the same pepper and onion mix for this dish and the next one. Maybe it's efficient, maybe I just don't wanna do this twice. We can see Tina at certain points in the show cooking all of the peppers and onions on the flat top at once, so I guarantee you those are being portioned out for each dish. They never specify in the show if it's hot or sweet sausage, so I got one of each. With sausages this thick, it's important to cook the internals before getting any real color on them. If you were to just saute them, let's say in a pan with some oil, they would be burnt and raw at the same time, which is not good for anybody. Bring some water to a simmer in a saute pan and place in the sausages. Cook them covered for about 20 minutes. You can tempt these by using a thermometer, but 20 minutes in simmering water is usually safe for standard sausages. Drain your water and get that same saute pan heating over medium. Add enough olive oil to coat the bottom of the pan and add in your cooked sausages. These are gonna keep cooking, but they pretty much just need to brown in the hot oil. As long as they were boiled for 20 to 25 minutes, you're gonna be golden. Keep them rotating and move them around to ensure an even browning. Chances are pretty high that the skins are gonna rip at some point. It's probably a good idea to poke them with a knife or a toothpick so they don't explode, but I just let them break in the pan at a certain point. Once these are browned to your liking, you can remove them from the pan, and we're gonna use all that same browned flavor in our peppers and onions. Leave the oil in there and then toss in the veg. Hit these with a large pinch of salt and let these get nice and browned, softened, and luscious. Be sure to set off your smoke alarm next to your kitchen. That really adds to the frenetic energy the show encapsulates so well. The final seasoning needed is a huge squeeze of lemon juice. This is that sweet acidity that the dish really needs. It's a little one note without it. Couldn't really figure out a way to like beautifully plate sausage and peppers, so here you go, 2 sausages on a plate with some peppers. There's nothing wrong with this at all, but in my opinion, it's kind of a little bland. I've never been a big sausage and pepper person, so that's probably part of it, but it's something that I think works better on a roll or something. It's not bad, like there's nothing wrong with this dish, it's just probably not what I would order if I was at the restaurant. I would order the next one that has chicken instead of sausage and just go that route. The other mainstay on the menu is the half chicken and peppers, which you'll remember from the amazing Wonder episode with all the to-go tickets. Easily the most stressful episode of the season when Carmi's yelling about firing every chicken. This is that chicken, so let's make it. To start, I wanted to show you how to break down a chicken into halves so it can dry brine in the fridge. You have to start by removing the backbone, which can easily be done with kitchen shears by going along both sides of the back. From there, you can clean up the cavity a little bit and then just make a hard cut directly into the middle of the breastplate. I'm not great at this, but hey, it works. From there, you can remove the ribs and extra bones on the inside, like the wishbones, for an easier eating time, or you can cut them off at the end before serving. That's what I did, but I think the other way actually makes sense. I think it's a better experience to just have them removed in the first place, and then when you go to eat them, you have to worry about like butchering it after it's cooked. Place this on a tray with a bunch of herbs and then hit it with a hefty amount of salt on both sides, and then I put some sugar on the meat side as well for good measure. This can go in the fridge for at least a day. 2 days is really great though. The skin is gonna dry out and the meat is gonna absorb the salt evenly, so it's really beautifully seasoned. So here's our chicken after a few days, and you can see how much different the skin looks. This is really nice. It's dry, it's tacked up a little bit, and it's ready to get beautifully browned. I removed the wing because it was sticking out a little bit too much. I think it would have kept the skin from browning. Okay, so to be honest, I think I made a few mistakes here based on more info from the show. They're at one point shown to have whole spatchcocked chickens that have been roasted, and then they cut them in half. But they're also shown to have half a chicken in a pan being basted. With that in mind, I assume they roast them whole, so they're just barely cooked. Cool them from there and then hold them until service. From there, it seems like they crisp the skin in a hot pan, and then that's when it's ready to go. I kind of went the opposite way though. I browned the skin in a pan over medium with a weight on it for around 20 to 25 minutes until it got nice and crispy. I then flipped it and cooked it for another 20 minutes, probably basting for about half of that until it was almost cooked. I used butter and oil for that basting. But I like my dark meat cooked way more than this, so I separated the two and then blasted the dark meat in the oven until it was more tender. I just did that under a low broiler. The breast itself was almost cooked perfectly in the pan, and then the thigh got the heat it needed. At the end of the day, it worked out, but this process was way longer than you need in a restaurant, so I'm pretty sure my guess and assumption was right. Anyways, I plated it up just like the show. Breast on one half, leg quarter on the other, with the peppers in the middle. These are those same peppers from the last recipe, and then the jus in the pan got poured on top. So more salt for good measure, and this is essentially a really, really delicious pan roasted chicken. I was really impressed at how good this turned out. I think dry brining does a lot of heavy lifting for the actual seasoning. I mean, it's pretty much just salt, sugar, butter, and then the peppers. And so you could season this in any manner of ways. I also think the peppers make a lot more sense here. You've got all the salty juiciness of the chicken, all the crispiness of the skin, and then all of that sweet acidity of the peppers. It works really, really well, and it's pretty delicious. What would a show based in Chicago be without the famed Chicago dog? And although we don't see them outright, we know they cater a birthday party and bring some dogs with them. The only caveat is no ketchup, and I can abide by that. I've never had a Chicago dog, so this should be pretty interesting. The tricky thing though is I live in Seattle, and it's kind of hard to get some of the very specific main ingredients of a Chicago dog. You can yell at me all you want in the comments down below, but I did what I could, and I think I got really, really close to something that someone from Chicago would be proud of. Actually, I texted a picture to my Chicago friend, and she was like super, super pumped about it. She said it looked spot on. So there you go. You can't argue with that. I've got anecdotal evidence, you got nothing. For the neon relish, it's easy enough to replicate by adding green food coloring to a sweet relish. I don't know why this is a thing, but it is, so I went with it. We need some diced white onion and a couple of tomato slices as well. This is basically like a weird salty salad hot dog. I don't know. I know they call it like dragging it through the garden, so I guess that kind of tracks with it. We'll see. For the dog itself, I'm gonna boil a case on hot dog until it's warmed through, like 5 minutes or so. That casing is important for the good snap that everybody loves in a good hot dog, so be sure to seek it out. Most like grocery store dogs usually don't have a casing. You can just check the back of each dog for the ingredients, and if it says like natural casing, you're good. You've got that casing dog that's gonna snap when you bite into it. To get the poppy seeds on the bun, I simply brushed melted butter on the outside, rolled it in poppy seeds, and then baked it at like 350 so they stuck. I think it looks the part quite nicely though, so you can tell me all you want. It's wrong, but I think it worked. For building, place your dirty dog in the bun and then hit it with a squirt of yellow mustard. White onions go on top of that. Then the tomato slices along with a couple of hot pickled peppers. Now we've got celery salt, which I kind of love. It's like a nice extra bit of saltiness for all of the tanginess that's going on. The neon relish goes on, and then an entire pickle spear. I feel like this can't be real. Like I feel like I'm being punked when I look at this hot dog back. Surprisingly though, I actually loved it. The like extra saltiness of the hot dog and the celery salt are balanced really nicely by the mustard, by the relish, by the pickle. The tomatoes are in season right now, so they're like extra juicy and like really bring a nice little bit of sweetness. I kind of think I'm a Chicago dog person. It's better than a Seattle dog, I'll say that much. Like we put cream cheese and onions on our hot dogs here, so I can't say anything. This was really good, and I definitely think I'm a Chicago dog person now. Like, yeah. We see one more family meal made by Ibrahim, who I think gets the best lines in the entire show. Ibrahim makes chicken suqaar, which is a celebratory Somali dish that's like this amazing cross between a stir fry and a stew. It seems like every family has a specific different recipe and different ingredients they use, but the main thing is that everything needs to be in bite-sized pieces. Some recipes have just bell pepper and are like super, super stripped back, but we see Ibrahim's version have carrots and potatoes in it, so I'll add that along with the diced bell pepper and onion. Carrots and potatoes seem kind of like contentious in this dish. I feel like similar to like Italian families and spaghetti sauce, people are pretty specific about the ingredients they like in their suqaar, so let me know if potatoes and carrots are weird to you. If you're someone from Somalia, let me know what you think about this version, specifically with the potatoes and carrots. I don't know if that's like standard or not. It was hard to find what the kind of requirements are for this dish, and I kind of love that. I'm gonna dice all these into bite-sized pieces and set them aside for now. Now for the hawash, which is our spice blend that brings a ton of warm flavor to the dish. It's a combination of cumin, black pepper, cinnamon, cardamom, more on that later, and turmeric. This is so freaking good, but can also be approximated by using ground cumin, ground turmeric, pepper, and ground cinnamon. I feel like most people have those in their pantry. I even saw a recipe that was just cumin and turmeric, so use what you've got. Chicken thigh is my choice for this over a breast, as it works really well and there's no need to worry about it drying out. In a hot cast iron, we'll begin by frying our onions and chicken together over medium-high. Season this with salt and let both of these brown together nicely. Now that they're browned, we can add our bell pepper, carrot, and potato. Season this with a few spoons of the hawash we made earlier and then fry it so you can start to really smell that cumin toasting. Add in enough water just to coat the bottom and come up about halfway on the ingredients. And then I'm gonna cover this and let it simmer for around 10 to 15 minutes, just enough time to soften the potatoes. Once the potatoes are softened, all the veggies are gonna be cooked, so don't worry about checking each one. You can pretty much just check the potatoes. Once they're all softened and the chicken is cooked through, I'll remove the lid and reduce the sauce so it's much thicker and coats all the ingredients. Try to get something similar to what I'm showing here. Taste this for seasoning and add a little bit more salt and lemon juice as needed. The lemon juice is a requirement to help bring everything to life. And you're gonna finalize this with some chopped cilantro and you're gonna enjoy. I mentioned that Sid's family meal was my favorite dish to eat, but this was my favorite dish to make. It's really quick, it's pretty easy, it's got a lot of stuff that we have around, and it's definitely going in Megan K and I's rotation of meals. I love the combination of like the deep, warm cumin and pepper. You sort of feel it in your chest, and then you get this like nice lemon juice to help bring everything and lift it all. It's really, really delicious. I noticed a little bit of like a numbing sensation as I was eating this, sort of like a mentholy vibe, and I realized that cardamom was the thing doing that. Sometimes if you like bite directly into a cardamom pod, your like whole mouth can go numb. I probably shouldn't have blended that in with all of the rest of the ingredients. I think it would be better to just crack a pod, throw it in as it's cooking, and then be sure not to eat it later. Either way, this was insane. I officially love this dish. I'm gonna be making it a whole lot more. I love the way this show calls upon past dishes for inspiration. While talking to his sister, Carmi is reminded of his family's lemon chicken. That's what she's making for dinner. This leads him to working on a lemon chicken piccata for the restaurant. And I think it shows how often we end up cooking what we grew up with, even if we don't mean to. I absolutely adore chicken piccata, and I grew up eating lemon chicken, so I was super pumped to make this version. The main identifiable difference was he used a full-on chicken cutlet, which I'm absolutely on board for. As far as piccata prep goes, just mince a shallot and slice a couple cloves of garlic really thin. I covered cutlet making in this video here, and to recap, butterfly a chicken breast and pound it thin. In this case, I'm gonna leave it as one large piece for a larger single serving. Yes, this is an espresso puck tamp. Don't judge me though, I don't have like one of those mallets. Season both sides with salt and pepper and let this sit for a while you make the breading station. For a piece like this, you just need an egg beaten with a little water to thin it out and a bowl full of breadcrumbs. Coat the chicken in flour and then cover it in the egg wash. Toss in the breadcrumb and then press them in so they stick to the egg wash. It's a nice idea to just sort of shake around and toss the bowl and then press it in so you get a full even coating. That's pretty much your standard procedure for every fried item. Fry this in a shallow layer of olive oil until brown on the first side, probably like 3 minutes or so depending on the heat. As long as you've got the chicken thin enough, the inside is gonna be cooked by the time it's brown, so just use the browning as an indicator. 3 minutes aside is about right though. Let this rest on a wire rack while we make the lemony pan sauce. We get a nice scene of Carmen teaching the staff how to make the sauce, which is perfect for our case. We're just gonna follow that to a T. For the pan sauce, melt a tablespoon of butter and then add in the shallot and garlic. Once these have a little bit of color, pretty much none, add in a splash of white wine and then a bunch of capers. Cook the wine out pretty much completely. That means make sure there's no liquid left in the pan, and then add in about 200 mils of chicken stock, and then reduce that until most of the liquid is gone here. We're gonna add about 2 tablespoons of cold butter with the heat off so it emulsifies and you end up with a beautiful creamy sauce. Season this with chopped parsley and lemon juice. One thing we see Carmen do that I really love is seasoning the chicken itself once it's out of the pan with salt, parsley, and lemon zest before the sauce goes on. I don't know, it just makes sense to me. I really like that. Lovingly spoon on your sauce so it looks really nice and enjoy a damn near perfect piccata. I am somebody who has eaten and made a ton of chicken piccata in my life and eaten a lot of lemon chicken, and something about just like the cutlet in this form really elevates this to something special. The sauce is almost overpoweringly salty and pungent, but the lemon helps sort of pull it back into something that's manageable, and then you get that crunch of the cutlet and you just want to keep eating and keep diving in. Frick, it's really good. This is definitely how I'm gonna be making chicken piccata going forward. I just think the cutlet move itself is so genius. I'm somebody who's like always down for a cutlet, so it's really easy for me to recommend this one. There are two recipes that are missing from this video, and you're probably wondering why. That being the donut and the chocolate cake. I'm not the strongest baker, so I just didn't want to put out a poor product. That's something that I never want to do. There are also tons of direct, exact recipes for the chocolate cake online from people who are much better bakers than me. So I didn't want to tackle the chocolate cake. I'll link to some of those down below if you really are looking for that. For the donut though, donuts are my all-time favorite dessert. And I think Marcus does some really cool and interesting things with the way that he makes this donut that I think deserve their own video. So I'm gonna be tackling that recipe in its own video. So you're gonna wanna subscribe if you're interested in when that recipe comes out. Okay, now back to the recipes. I think the most popular dish from the first season, besides the spaghetti sauce, which we're gonna get to, is the cola braised short ribs that Sid's working on. It's a point of stress between our two main characters, and it's just an interesting dish overall. If you go frame by frame, you can see exactly from her notebook what she's working on. I took like 30 to 40 minutes to go frame by frame to get all of the blurry information out of her notebook I could on the risotto and the short ribs themselves. So I'm pretty confident to say this is exactly what she was doing to make this dish. In the show, you hear them sort of discussing using an etouffee stock for the risotto, but then when you look at the journal itself, she opts for chicken stock. At some point, they're working on the shrimp, and clearly the etouffee stock that she mentions here that probably got scrapped and wasn't a dish that they wanted to use, and so the etouffee stock would be out as well. That's probably why she uses chicken stock instead. The thing I absolutely would have never seen coming, and it took me a while to figure out what it said, is the addition of mascarpone cheese in the risotto itself. It is genius. It basically replaces the heavy cream and the butter with a little bit of like a tangy sweetness, and I just think it's so smart. So we'll get to it. Anyways, I've got a couple carrots that I'll roughly chop and a yellow onion along with it. Season the ribs themselves with salt and pepper, and we can begin the long braise on these. I'm just doing a standard braising procedure here. So brown the seasoned meat, add the chopped veggies, add tomato paste, deglaze with wine, and then cook that down. I like to cook the wine down here a little bit before adding the beef stock and the Coke. I know they say cola, and I'm a Pepsi guy myself personally, but I can't see braising anything in Pepsi being good in any way. Season this with salt and pepper, then toss in some bay leaf, some parsley, fresh thyme, and a few cloves of crushed garlic. Nestle the beef on top, and then place this in a 325-degree oven for 3.5 hours with a cartouche. I only use a cartouche because they mention it in the show. It's basically like a parchment paper lid that allows a little bit reduction without it being too much. This needs quite a while at a low temperature, so just check it every now and then and keep an eye on the liquid levels. If you need to add more, that's totally okay. Just don't add a ton. We're not making a soup, we are making a braise. Once you're happy with the tenderness levels, you can pull the meat out and then strain the braising liquid into another pot. A lot of people will let this cool and then place it in the fridge so you can easily remove any and all fat from the liquid. If you just try reducing the liquid with all the fat in it, you're gonna have a bad time. It's gonna be greasy and oily, and that's not really what anybody wants. My issue with that is that I've already spent 4 hours making this. I'm not waiting another 12. What I do is just add a handful of ice to the liquid so the fat immediately solidifies, and then I strain that out, and I'm left with a decently fatless liquid. It's not perfect, but it works pretty well, and I don't have to wait 12 hours to do it. I'm gonna leave all this where it is now so I can make the risotto and then come back and finish the sauce in the short ribs. I showed off a risotto in my scallop video that's here, and the process is really similar with slightly adjusted ingredients. You're gonna add a little over a liter of chicken stock to one pan and keep that hot on the back burner, and then you're gonna grab another pan for the risotto itself. In the risotto pan, melt a few knobs of butter and add a minced shallot and 2 cloves of minced garlic. Cook these until they just have taken on a little bit of color, and then add in your arborio rice. Toast that in the melted butter for a few minutes until you can really smell the nuttiness of the rice. You're gonna notice it. That sounds very like fluffy and not technical, but you'll notice when it smells different. Just make sure that the rice is starting to toast a little bit. Add a splash of white wine and cook that out, and then begin the process of working the stock into the rice. Set a 20-minute timer and work a little bit of the hot stock in at a time with the goal of getting almost all the stock in by the 20 minutes. You usually would use a ladle, but I literally broke my ladle minutes before doing this, so I just had to pour it in. You're basically gonna add the stock and mix, and then cook it until it's thick, and do that over and over again. While that's happening, it's easy enough to portion the short ribs and remove any excess fat. I basically ended up with 2 good pieces of short rib and a bunch of delicious meat to pick through. I don't know if you noticed it while I was seasoning this, but like 2 of these pieces were just half fat, which doesn't always lead to the best eating experience. At this point, it's been about 20 minutes. The risotto is looking great. The granules are cooked but not mushy, and there's just enough liquid to melt the ton of Parmesan we're about to add. Mix in some chopped parsley and thyme for a little bit of like fragrance that permeates the whole thing, and then grate in a lot of parm. This is really up to you. It's gonna help season and flavor the dish, so go nuts here. Season this with pepper and then add in a big spoonful of that mascarpone cheese for creaminess and sweetness. A squeeze of lemon is necessary for the ribbons of brine that the critic notices in the risotto. My guess was that this was decently acidic, a nice contrast to the sweet, salty short ribs. This can rest on the stove covered to stay warm, and we're going to be able to adjust the final texture right before serving. To finish the short rib, reduce the sauce we strained earlier over medium-high heat until it's at least half the volume, if not less. In the show, they're making their own stock, which, let's be honest, I'm not doing here. That just means it has a lot more gelatin, so the final sauce is going to end up a lot thicker. To account for that on my end, I cheated and used a cornstarch slurry to thicken it, but it's fine though, it totally works out really, really well. Once it's thickened, taste this and add salt as needed, then drop in the short ribs and coat them in the sauce. When I tasted this, I noticed it needed a lot of salt. And ironically, I thought it was much too sweet. Carmi was right all along. It needed acid to help brighten and balance the whole thing. I just added a squeeze of lemon to account for that, and I think it was the right call. This kind of coating and basting process helps warm the short ribs through and gives them a really nice shiny appearance. Plate this up just like you see, with a pile of the risotto and then the short rib and beautiful sauce on top, and get ready to enjoy the fruits of your hard work. I think this is a really beautiful dish. It's got a lot of deep richness from the short rib itself. Here's Megan Kay and I both really enjoying this dish. We thought it was beautiful, really well seasoned. The risotto is outstanding, but shockingly, this wasn't my favorite of the bunch. I just think there are some really high highs in this list, and this one doesn't quite reach where I'd want it to. I think the cola brings a good amount of sweetness that's balanced really well, ironically, by the risotto itself. That mascarpone and the lemon juice in the risotto really help kind of pull it back from being way too like sweet and cloying and salty. So I think that's necessary. I think this whole thing is really delicious. Is it my favorite preparation of short rib though? I don't know if I would say that. Anyways, it's still really good and absolutely worth making. I think there are just some other ones on this list that are worth making a little more. Following the massive meltdown in episode 7, we see Sid and Marcus have both left the beef, at least for now. And I totally get it. There's a reason why I don't work in restaurant kitchens and I cook on the internet. That is way too stressful for me. We see Sid preparing a beautiful sea bass with a tomato confit. I was absolutely stoked to make this, as it starts to get into the slightly fancier dishes we see in the later seasons. For the tomato confit, start with a pint of washed, delicious tomatoes. From there, grab a bunch of herbs. Parsley, tarragon, and basil are all delicious with tomato. Peel off a large piece of lemon zest and grab a few cloves of garlic. Basically, we're seasoning the oil, and that's gonna season the tomato itself. The oil is gonna gently poach the tomatoes until they're these beautiful, soft gems ready to burst. Season this with salt and pepper and place this in a 200 Fahrenheit oven for 1 hour. After that 1 hour is up, turn off the heat and let it cool in the oven for 30 minutes. Remove the whole thing from the oven, and these things are truly stunning. They are beautifully delicious, and I will absolutely be making these again no matter what. A few things we see in the cooking of this episode is Sid adding minced shallot to the dressing for the fish and a bunch of lemon, so prep that as well. Just get a couple slices of lemon and mince some shallot. For the fish itself, I couldn't actually get sea bass, but I found something really delicious and amazing as well, which is halibut. I'll portion this into even pieces and season both sides with salt. Mine didn't have a skin on, so I need to be delicate with the cooking of this. I don't want to move it too much so it tears. I'll start by placing this top side up, that's going to be the side that sits on top of the plate, into a hot pan with oil, and then I'll press them in just to ensure that each part of the fish is making contact with the hot pan. These are going to cook untouched most of the way on that first side. Once you see the color turning opaque, about 60 to 70% up that first side, you can flip them. I could have had my heat a little hotter for more browning, but that's all right. I really just didn't want to smoke out my alarm again. Add a little of that oil from the tomatoes and begin basting the top side. In a few minutes of basting, the fish should be just perfectly cooked and flaky. I don't want it overcooked, I want it like just that kind of rosy, beautiful, opaque white in the middle. We can pull them and let them rest for a minute while we create the confit mix for the plate. We see Sid mix a few of the tomatoes with the shallot, some lemon juice, salt, and pepper. Easy enough. Make sure to add enough of that oil so that it's kind of like a juicy, saucy mixture so you can grab it with a spoon later, and then place that down in a bowl plate and place the fish on top. Add a few herbs, some flaky salt, more olive oil, and lemon juice. The nice thing about this dish is that it works at both hot and room temp, and it's delicious either way. I actually think I prefer it at room temp. It's a little bit more refreshing that way. The tomatoes really burst into this light, refreshing sweet sauce with the light subtlety of the fish itself. This is really nice, and in my opinion, the most impressive dish of the show. Megan Kay and I agreed that this felt like the nicest dish of the bunch. Make this when you really care about impressing somebody with finesse. Actually, looking back and going through this footage, this is the dish that I want to eat the most. This is what I'm like craving and would easily tear into right now. Maybe it's just because it's like hot in Seattle right now, but this just sounds so freaking good. Throughout the series, we see that one of Mikey's signature dishes was his Braciole, a filled and rolled beef dish braised in a red sauce. I gotta be honest, I grew up eating Braciole, and as a kid, I absolutely hated it. I texted my siblings this week about Braciole, and we agreed that like it was just not our favorite at all. So let's see how this one stacks up to what I grew up with. As I mentioned, this is braised in a red sauce, so it would only make sense to combine the final two dishes of the season, Mikey's Braciole and the family meal red sauce. They're both his recipes, so to me it makes sense that he would use this sauce to braise the meat. For the Braciole, we need thin pieces of either flank or skirt steak. I've seen some people make those with sirloin, but I think that's like a little bit too chewy for a long braise like this. You can use what you got. Place the pieces in plastic wrap and pound them out so they're thinner and more even. Season this with salt and pepper and then apply a layer of prosciutto. We see the family adding some toasted pine nuts, some toasted breadcrumbs, and then Carmen comes in with some grated parm and then torn parsley. These need to be either tied with butcher's twine or toothpicked so they hold together in the cook. Season the outside with salt and pepper, and then we can brown these in a cast iron pan. Get the pan hot, add in a little olive oil, and then cook them until you see color on all sides. Take these out of the pan and then set them aside so you can get to work on the sauce. Specifically, the sauce that's worth $300,000, I believe. Does anyone remember that Carmy throws away like 2 of those cans in the first episode? Does that mean he just like tossed $5 grand? I've always wondered if they remembered that, or if that's just something that like I noticed and clocked. I don't know why. I don't know. This is the crap that I notice in shows. One thing I absolutely love that we see Carmy do is probably the most Italian thing I could possibly think of. His brother leaves him a very specific, pretty easy to follow recipe, and he immediately changes it to be different for his taste. I think that just encompasses like mine is better than yours in the perfect way. It's definitely something I would do to my brother. We're gonna start by making the garlic basil oil. Heat about 100 mils of olive oil in a pot with 10 cloves of garlic, along with a bunch of basil. We see Carmy adding chili flake, which I'm all here for. Once the garlic is softened, we can turn off the heat and let this cool. Now we don't know 100% what the oil would be used for, but I don't wanna just waste the garlic and the basil that's in here, so I just blended it all together. I'll add this to the sauce in a minute. For the base red sauce, we see Carmy brown a yellow onion in a bunch of butter and then add the 2 cans of money-filled tomatoes. Shoot, mine seem to be missing that cash. Don't know why. Add your Braciole here along with the basil oil and let this come up to a simmer. Add a little bit of water as needed, and I'm gonna cook this for 2 to 3 hours, basically until the Braciole is tender and luscious. I don't want that chewy Braciole that I grew up with. At the 3-hour mark, the meat is really tender and we can pull it so it doesn't become dry. All that's left is to boil some spaghetti in salted water and then plate these 2 dishes. The Braciole can be sliced up and placed on the sauce, and let's talk about this one first. It sounds weird, but there's always a specific smell to Braciole that I remember from growing up. Something about the prosciutto and pine nuts intermingling with the red sauce, and I guess I could see how people could like that. I will say though, this version turned out really tender, really flavorful, and I was willing to eat cold leftovers of this the next day. So I think this recipe is way better than what Granny used to make. Sorry, Granny. Now for the family meal spaghetti sauce, and I think I'm about to ruffle some feathers here. Maybe it's just because I grew up with a specific style of sauce like every week, and going back to what I was saying earlier, I feel like everybody has their own sauce that they feel like is the best. This was good. It was fine. It was a pretty standard spaghetti sauce with not a lot of like extra crazy things going on here. I think this is totally inoffensive, and if you're looking for a really easy spaghetti sauce, this is a good way to go. Honestly, maybe cooking it that long with the Braciole in it sort of changed the way that it tastes. I bet this would be better cooked for like 30 minutes and then you just take out the onion and you got something really, really tasty. I think it was good. I think it just sort of tasted like a standard red sauce. People can totally hate on me for that, but I think it matches the show really well for me to think that my sauce is better than theirs. Again, truly, what's more Italian than that? And that's all 11 recipes. This video was quite the undertaking as I gave myself the challenge to cook and film all of these recipes in 7 days. So if you enjoyed this, you can let me know by leaving a like or a comment, or even better, you could share this with somebody who you think is gonna enjoy it. That really does mean a lot to me. I'd love to do this for season 2 and season 3 because I just think there's so much to this show. So let me know if y'all would be interested in seeing that. Videos like this are impossible without the amazing people supporting me directly on Patreon through patreon.com/CameronMarty. Massive, massive shout out to them for keeping this thing going. There is a ton of cooking content on this channel, but one that I think you're really gonna enjoy is this deep dive into tortas, so check that one out. Thank you again so much for watching. Cheers.